Towards the end of the Cold War, the US Army was exploring upgrade options for some of their light helicopters. They envisioned an operational requirement for a battlefield scout helicopter that could survive in an increasingly sophisticated sensor environment, and they put out a request for proposals in 1988 for a new light helicopter to replace the OH-6 and OH-58. Despite common misconceptions, this was never intended to replace the RAH-64 Apache. It was intended to operate alongside it. As the Cold War ended, the project suffered severe problems as the goals and exact requirements for the new helicopter kept changing almost every year. The new design, now called the RAH-66 Comanche, used a variety of features designed around low observability. Basically, everything about the Comanche was bleeding edge, and unsurprisingly, there were a large number of problems that were identified after its first flight in January of 1996. There were problems with the avionics software, issues with some of the internal construction, and excessive vibrations. Still, it showed a lot of potential. Unfortunately, it was also attracting a lot of controversy. Politicians were questioning the need for it in an environment of reduced geopolitical tensions. The cost was soaring. There was disagreement about when it would be ready for service. There were still some performance problems to work out, and even the basic need to replace the older Scout helicopters was being re-examined. On top of all of this, the effectiveness of its low observability features was a constant source of contention. The Comanche featured a faceted shape, radar-absorbent materials, special paint that was supposed to reduce its infrared signature, and a fully composite rotor. How well any of these features worked is still classified to this day, but the Comanche did have a very distinct sound when it was flying, and it really doesn't sound like any other helicopter that's ever been flown. In the end, only 2 prototypes were built and tested. However, with costs soaring and the need shrinking, the project was finally cancelled for good in 2004. What we get in War Thunder is the RAH-66, a premium attack helicopter in Rank 6 of the American helicopter tree. The Comanche, unsurprisingly, has a fully featured ballistics computer, night vision, along with thermal sights with a 63x optical zoom and an auto tracker. It also gets an advanced radar warning receiver that tracks into the M-band. It doesn't get any countermeasures, however, and I'll be discussing the stealth features towards the end of the review. It also carries the CR radar set. This is a K-band unit mounted on top of the rotor that has ground MTI search along with an air-to-air search mode, but its scope range is very limited. For loadouts, the Comanche has 6 hardpoints on internal retractable weapon stations and 2 more on optional stub wings. You can mix and match between unguided rockets and missiles. Your air-to-air missile is the AIM-92 air-to-air Stinger, which is what ATAS stands for. This is an all-aspect infrared missile with IRCCM and reasonably good tracking, but somewhat limited range. Your anti-tank missile is the AGM-114B Hellfire. This is a laser-guided version of the Hellfire, and to be blunt, its lethality isn't as strong as a lot of the other helicopter missiles at this BR. It's slow, with an effective range of around 6 or 7 kilometers, and sometimes needs a double tap to tank out a main battle tank, but more lightly armored vehicles will reliably pop on a direct hit. The flight performance of the Comanche is excellent. The very first thing you're going to notice is that this helicopter is fast. Very fast. With full collective, you can easily cruise at over 300 kilometers an hour at treetop level, and you'll constantly be getting speed warnings. However, even with that said, out in regular gameplay with this thing, I didn't run into any retreating blade stall problems or really any controllability issues at higher speeds. Just remember that at higher speeds, a helicopter like this is going to behave a bit more like a slow aircraft than a fast helicopter, and you'll need to give rudder input along with cyclic for controlled bank turns, instead of trying to rotate just off the tail rotor. Now, generally speaking, the agility of the Comanche is also excellent. As far as helicopters go, this thing is fully aerobatic, with a strong cyclic response and reasonably good tail rotor response at lower speeds. The only thing that's kind of lacking is the collective. In a flat hover, the collective feels a little more sluggish than I expected, and a lot closer to much heavier helicopters. This isn't really a big problem, it's just something to keep in mind. When you take the Comanche out in live matches, it's going to be pretty close to the helicopter meta that you're used to. Before anything else though, remember to pull your damn landing gear up. That said, standoff missile attacks from just above the horizon are generally going to be your bread and butter, and this helicopter does that fairly well. The good optics, strong zoom, and thermal sights make targeting pretty easy, but just remember the slow travel time of the Hellfires, and that it might not one-shot well-armored main battle tanks. That gets to loadout selection. I'm gonna say first that I don't use the stub wings, and I'll get to that in a minute, but my preferred loadout was either 4 or 5 Hellfires and 1 or 2 Stingers. You can use the Comanche for rocket rush attacks, and the CCIP helps aim, but the low ammo count per rocket pod does hold it back a bit, unless you take a full loadout of 56 Hydras, including on the stub wing pylons. Now, the huge caveat with this thing is its lack of countermeasures. You don't get any flares or chaff and have to rely entirely on using your stealth features to just avoid missile launches in the first place, or use your agility to try and manually dodge incoming shots. The stealth features, which I discuss more in a moment, are better at longer ranges, but your Hellfires are slow, and if you throw one out from like 7 kilometers max range, your target might die or move behind cover before it arrives. This puts you in a position of sometimes making difficult choices between offensive or defensive priorities. Also notable, the Comanche's radar uses the K-band, which some aircraft radar warning receivers won't pick up. In PvE battles, this helicopter can be very effective. It's fast, so you can get to the targets quickly, and the AI-controlled SPAA won't see it until it gets pretty close, like 3 or 4 kilometers, so you can easily loiter in Hellfire range and just pound the convoys. Visually, opinions are going to be mixed, but I think the Comanche is a really good-looking helicopter. They did a great job on the paint jobs, and the 3D model is excellent. But the cockpit internals are awful. Just be aware of that if you want to fly this thing in VR. In terms of the Comanche's stealth features, I did some controlled testing with a variety of radar sets, and the results were a little surprising. More modern SPAA units, like the Claws, had no trouble spotting the Comanche at basically any range, and out in missions I've actually had them fire missiles at me within 2 or 3 seconds of taking off on some of the more flatter maps. Though surprisingly, the Iris-T had a bit of a harder time, and it didn't spot the Comanche until 5.5 kilometers. The Panseer was able to spot the Comanche at about 7 kilometers in radar search mode. The Chinese Tor was able to see it on search from just under 7 kilometers and lock it up at about 5.3. The Roland was able to lock the Comanche from about 7 kilometers with manual boresight targeting, but it only detected it in search from around 5 kilometers. The ADATS was able to spot the Comanche from around 4.5 kilometers, while the Strela had a much harder time. Its missile didn't get a tone until 3.7 kilometers, and its radar wouldn't target until about 3.2. The mast-mounted radar on the Mi-28N helicopter didn't spot the Comanche until 2.5 kilometers. I also tried a few air intercepts using an F-16 and a MiG-23, and the Comanche was completely invisible to both of their radar sets at all distances from a front aspect, even up close. Opening the bay doors also did make a difference, especially on some of the less advanced radar. In general, with the weapons bay open, things like the ADATs and Roland were able to spot it from about 1 kilometer further away. The stub wings also had a similar impact, but the extra distance didn't seem to stack with the doors being open. Also notable, aspect does matter, and the Comanche was easier to detect from the side, which really isn't surprising. Also not a big surprise is that it was dramatically more difficult to spot on radar when it was flying low with like mountains and trees and stuff in the background. IRST systems like the Ocelot or the one on the MiG-23 had absolutely no problem spotting the Comanche even at fairly longer ranges. So the main takeaway is that the low observability stealth features do seem to work and they make a difference, but it's not exactly invisible. Also, a big thanks to Donut with Mustache for being the target drone in these tests. Landing the Comanche ends up being really easy, as the high agility of this thing makes it very controllable down near the ground. Just remember to put the gear out, and lock the brakes after you land so it doesn't start rolling all over the place. To close out on the RAH-66 Comanche Helicopter. This thing is very fast, it's highly agile, and it's got actual stealth features. However, its selection of weapons is incredibly limited. It doesn't have any countermeasures, and it's very expensive. The final verdict on the Comanche is that this is actually a really fun helicopter to fly, and with a little practice and clever positioning, its stealth gimmick can actually matter. Its high cost is an issue, but if you're looking for a premium helicopter for the American tech tree, this might be a good pick. As always, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, check out this other one.